The U.S. House of Representatives approved legislation on Wednesday to avoid a government shutdown later this month. The measure provides funding for the government from late March through September. The plan also would give the Defense Department more leeway to absorb the spending cuts that went into effect on March 1st. However, some Democrats argued the bill was inadequate to cover the needs of domestic agencies in the wake of the spending cuts. The White House also issued a statement expressing concern about the bill, but stopped short of a veto. Joining us now from the nation's capital is Washington Bureau Chief for the Oklahoman, Chris Castile. Chris, how are you this morning?
I'm fine, Dave. How are you?
Doing quite well. I'll lead off with this question. What will this bill do for the Department of Defense, and how could it affect the military posts and bases here in the Sooner State?
I think it's a little early to know just how much it will help. It will help a lot. It'll help the Pentagon with this funding crunch that they've been facing. And it was always for the Defense Department. It was always both the automatic spending cuts that, as you said, went into effect on March 1st. That was going to require them to cut $46 billion almost, over the next 7 months. You've got to find a way to do it. But they're also kind of crippled by operating under this government funding resolution that's been in effect for, over a year, that sort of has tied their hands in where the money is in their accounts. And so what this bill did was it shifted more money into one of their most important accounts, the operations and maintenance account. And it will no doubt help them. They won't have to defer probably so much maintenance, which may mean the furloughs of some civilian employees aren't as, they don't have to take as many furlough days, but it is going to have, they still will have to cut that much money, but they do now have some flexibility, more money in an account that was almost depleted to kind of cushion the blow of this. So it was something that they needed. And as you said, some of the Democrats were opposed to this bill, mainly because, I think that they favor, what helping the Defense Department, but it doesn't give that same flexibility to a lot of other domestic agencies, whether it's education, even Homeland Security or the Justice Department. They're still bound by these automatic cuts that went into effect, but don't get the same flexibility that this bill gave to the Defense Department, to Veterans Affairs, to military construction. Now that's supposed to change in the Senate. Senate still has to pass its own version of this bill, and they are expected to give a little bit more flexibility to some of the other agencies, especially Homeland Security and Justice, ones that really do have some kind of responsibility for the security of the country. So
as it goes to the Senate, Chris, what did the Oklahoma legislators have to say about the bill?
Well, most of them, out of the 5 Republican House members from Oklahoma, 4 of them voted for it. And Tom Cole, a Republican from Moore, and one of the, he's got a couple of bases in his district, big ones, Tinker Air Force Base and Fort Sill. He was for this, but he's also for, these Republicans from Oklahoma are also for locking in the cuts that went into effect on March 1st. This bill does not eliminate any of those cuts. They are still in effect. It's just a matter of how much flexibility to give the agencies to deal with them. And I think the Oklahoma lawmakers, except for Jim Bridenstine from Tulsa, complained that the bill should have also defunded some of the Health Care Act provisions, that he's opposed to, all of them, which is kind of ironic because some of the Democrats were arguing that this didn't provide enough funding to start implementing the state exchanges where people are going to start buying their health insurance from beginning next year. So I guess it depends on what party you're from and how you view the Health Care Act on whether it was defunded or not funded enough.
Well, speaking of such, Chris Castile joining us via Skype from the Washington Examiner's newsroom. He's our Washington Bureau Chief. Chris, what were some of the chief concerns from the Obama administration?
The same. The Obama administration obviously didn't want the automatic cuts known as the sequester to go into effect at all. They've issued all these dire warnings about what's going to happen. No food inspectors. Obviously, the Defense Department furloughs, border security agents furloughed, at long lines at airports, et cetera. So what they really want is to replace those cuts. But as far as this bill goes, I think they're going to have to accept this bill. They don't want to shut down the government either, which would happen on March 27th if they can't come to some agreement to keep it funded. Within that framework, I think they have the same concerns as some of the Democrats in Congress in that they want other agencies to have some flexibility to deal with these cuts and move money around so they don't have to furlough critical people.
You know, speaking of TSA and long lines at the airport, didn't I read something about now you can take 2 golf clubs with you on an airplane? And why just 2? What are you going to take?
I don't know.
Well, speaking of the White House, the president invited several Republicans to a dinner to discuss this latest challenge facing the nation. Among the guests was Senator Tom Coburn. And Chris, you spoke with Mr. Coburn before he attended the dinner. What was his feeling heading into the discussion?
I think he's wide open to talking to the president about reaching what's called a grand bargain, which is a big package of deficit reduction that includes spending cuts, includes tax reform, includes reform to the entitlement programs like Medicare. He's all for it. I think his take on going into that dinner last night, though, was that the president, has basically what the senator said was he's overplayed his hand on the sequester, on these automatic spending cuts, with all these dire warnings that the White House issued. They've all of those dire warnings, or a lot of them, have been challenged in the press and found to be, maybe this isn't going to be as bad as the White House and the administration is making it out to be. So, and there have been a couple of polls in the last week that show the president's approval rating has gone down. So his campaign go out into the country and blame Republicans for these cuts going into effect didn't work. So I think the senator's view was that this is part of a political move on the president's part to try to bring Republicans to the table to work on some kind of broad deficit reduction package that will eliminate these drastic cuts and get the deficit, all the budget debate off the table for a while, so they're not constantly lurching from one crisis to another. They get a deficit reduction package they can all agree to, move on to other things, whether it's immigration or whatever.
Chris Castillo from the nation's capital via Skype. Chris, thanks so much for your time today, sir.
Glad to do it, Dave.
All right, more from Chris Castillo in the Oklahoman every day, and of course online at newsok.com.